Hey, Dean here, Esoteric Principles of Light. Good to see you. The unfortunateness of the time or era that we are in right now. To think about the ancestors who put us in the situation that we are in now. I believe at one time, the male force was celebrated in such a way that it was seen more as the dragon, that it couldn't be identified as male or female because of a metaphysical phenomenon that occurred when somebody reached beyond the height of their sort of Vitruvian man potential. I think that the term male became like a market cap to keep people from becoming more, morphing into something greater, into this sort of Ubermensch or higher man. But that if you could see a moment in time, I don't know, maybe it was a Tartarian empire, maybe it took place briefly prior to, post, during war, the rise and fall of the Mongolian Empire for a couple hundred years. I have no idea. But there was a time, planetarily, there was even a story of a female pirate king, if you will. And she ruled the seas with brute force around the Caribbean. And I remember reading this book about that and being blown away. I don't remember what her name was, but after this video, I'll definitely go back and look that up and reference that. But where there wouldn't be any female guile used, that's what martial arts is about. When a male and a female engage in combat to the death, you look at the martial art and then you start to realize that there's still a discrepancy there. Well, if there isn't any sort of courtesies expected, courtesies given, and it's just basically every man to each his own, weaponry would come heavily into the picture, and the use of weaponry and whether or not you can hang on to that weapon. And so status started to become more and more important, and then just downright overall fear. And we start to see this rise of this sort of brotherhood, which in the Blood Meridian, I brought this up several times, that character, the judge, is a perfect portrayal of this toxic masculine force, that it is not the motive force, right? So I believe what's seen as masculinity or male or man energy, that females can tap into this just as well when they get up into the height of performance. That is, when you're eating just the right thing, when you're performing in such a way, when you're building up this momentum force, there's like this plasma that you become magnetic, right? And through magnetism, you start to go into this whole other area that can only be seen as definitely literally liminal, from an esoteric sense, to say that there's that point where the magnetism drops off and those strong and weak nuclear forces begin to interplay and create this sort of 0 point energy. And that these esoteric mind meditations of the highly skilled, highly trained, highly intuitive, Gnostic warrior begin to manifest and create an entire new character, this divine character that could only be described, as like God in man. And that divine manifestation is what the Black Lodge and what the Pope sits on the throne until God's return. They know God's not returning. And then they know full well how God would return. And it's through this mechanism. And so we're pressed to back to this time of war, where war is inevitable, and the war that's within all of us, and that is, we have to get our principle protocol straight. We have to prize those principles in order and understand what they mean. We have to live through the process of, we have to get past the process of samsara, work into what they call metanoia, go into and be rejected from unity, the force of unity, right? And to understand that this is a chiral positioning with yourself. The emergence of this other force, which begins to show something where you're going to be taken advantage of if you merely use mercy or compassion or care, right? That you can care for a small creature for a time, but eventually that creature is going to grow up, and they're going to have to go their own way and learn this and go through this process themselves. But it's up to them whether or not they just go back into samsara, and that's the birth death cycle over and over again, or they're going to go into this higher form. And that's where salvation comes by way of grace. And you really have to have an intimate understanding of this. It's like you're going into the ultimate intimacy with yourself, and that is what they're afraid of. The Black Lodge, the Black Projects, right? the globalists, the World Economic Forum. There are many wings that branch off of this, like the hidden hand, but it's been around forever, and it would ultimately manifest just from intelligence itself. That is, if it's allowed to exist in any way, in the postulation of certain calculations that don't have a direct meaning, that go back to, say, the phi or phi Fibonacci sequence that displays perfection in motion, and this energy in motion becoming emotion, and the metaphysical display of metacognition, right? To be able to work in a very telepathic way, to be able to work with your own energy and the energy systems, and that this sort of divine or sacred geometry is something that is there for all of us. And I do believe that the term, when the dragon is referenced, that it is an entity, that it is a force, and that it comes back into play when the universe, beyond the universe, like when the processionary celestial phenomenon of the stars and the placement of everything comes into itself in this predestination, and that the event becomes undeniable, and we're all chasing after that event to occur. There was a time where everybody could block it out, could pretend that it doesn't exist, but in that was foretold. It's part of the whole a priori pre-existent notion of reincarnation, lifetimes, building up of energies, learning, and going through this process of development. And so ultimately, by you just developing yourself, I guess what I'm saying is the person that you are today doesn't even loosely represent who your true ephemeral identity is, in the culmination of all the identities that you've had throughout the ages, throughout time. Maybe different universes, maybe, I don't know. I think those postulations are, entirely ridiculous. Lee Smolin talking about this whole concept of, like this A-B sort of versions of time. I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth, but talking about thick time. And really, even though I know that he wouldn't agree with it, it's like he's describing this thick time almost like a coagulant, like it's a binding force, right? This dark energy or this dark matter, gravitons and gravity, it's like those things are conceptual. And it seems to me very obvious that when you're talking about time, you're talking about metering, you're talking about a meter. When you look at the positioning, talking about chiral or juxtaposed or antithetical, you talk about magnetic force and the fact that you'll have a strong and weak nuclear force there. That it just seems so obvious to me that without that component, things would be so direct, and the indirect aspect of it, the only thing that we can see is exactly what I believe they're playing with CERN and everything else. Like that they want to act like it's all hocus pocus, but in the vacuum, in the fields, in the nuclear forces, that's where the answer lies. And when we become really one with the liminal, where we both, like the cornerstone rejected, when we both reject and are rejected by the mainstream, when we reject the sex, male, female, and don't embrace anything that's been fed to us, and we become greater than the demons, the disincarnate that tried to trap us in samsara to go back through. You got to understand that these beings probably think that they're doing God's work. They probably think that they're doing the most altruistic, benevolent work, that they're keeping what is going, keeping what is present, because they're so not only enthralled with, but they're so cruxed and connected to an identity in an immutable sort of way, where they see themselves in a certain way and they won't give that up. And then more so, because they're in love with themselves, they are lovers of themselves, they fall in love with the concept of other people. And they want to bring back this person and that person. But if you could see that finite moment where, from a human standpoint, a human perspective, where, from the ages of, your late teens to really your late 30s, that's you. And prior to that and after, you become something else, and it's like, that's not who you are. So there's that depiction of Clotho, which is heavily related to, in fact, that's what the anti-aging property gene studies are based on. They call it Clotho. Clotho gets heavily into the three witches who are spinning time, ironically, right? And then also a term that's used is Zeitgebers, like zeitgeist, ghost, right? That there's like a ghost in the machine. So anyway, I've got to get back to somebody who's inquiring about purchasing something on Facebook, but some really interesting areas to look into there. Esoteric Principles of Light. Dean.